today or this week. All right. And we will begin in five, four, three. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman Podcast. I hope you are doing well. Please ignore the giant Easter egg in my background. We are still finishing up filming an Easter presentation, a spring presentation. Uh, yeah. So that is kind of the weird thing you'll see in my background. But joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, how's your week been?
Man, it's been good. It's just crazy. I mean, it's the last week of classes and next week's finals week, and the students go home for the summer, thank the Lord. Um, but yeah, it's been good. You know, it's just my kid's on the verge of walking, which is just scaring the crap
Exciting.
out of me. But, you know,
But that's the exciting time. I think we saw a video when we were trying to get Peter to walk, and Laura and I were sitting in the hallway, and we would turn him around, and he would just like walk to Laura, and he'd go like one. He would just take like maybe like one step and then go down, and then he'd crawl over to me, and then I would do like, oh, give him hugs. I'd turn him around, and he would go. And then there's one thing where Laura has him, and I kind of scooted back a little bit farther, and he walked all the way to me. You can just see the look on my face. I was like, like I was just so overjoyed with excitement that he was able to walk that far to me. So, and then after that, it was done. It was
I think why I'm terrified is that I feel like she's a little bit of a risk taker. And we like we have a California king in our master bedroom, and she was sitting in the middle of it, and Alicia was in our bathroom, like I guess doing her hair or something. And I walk in the room, and Audrey like literally crawled to the edge of the bed like she was just gonna like fling herself off of it. And she was just grinning ear to ear. I'm like, you'll be grinning when you fall off the bed and you hurt yourself.
well, she needs to learn how to take her bump so she can elbow drop her daddy from the couch.
I'll give her an RKO out of nowhere.
RKO out of nowhere. Oh goodness, fun. Well, that's always fun. The most joyful and terrifying things at that age as a kid start advancing, and then after that, they're going to start talking more, and then they're
They'll
going to
never
back
shut up.
talk and oh goodness. But the topic we're going to talk about today is actually an interesting one because Michael, you sent this to me, and it was an article titled an article that is titled Five Reasons We Need Camp Meetings Now More Than Ever. And for those of you who are listening, if you're unfamiliar with that term camp meeting, probably probably sometime like right after the Great Depression, there was these moments where people would gather together in like tents, sometimes over the summer, and they would have like these big revivalistic preaching and worship, and it was just a time for communities to come together. And then, especially within Micah and I's tradition within the Church of God, we always had our kind of like our regional or state camp meetings that we would always have, and then our national denomination would have like what they would call Anderson camp meeting, which they haven't had that in years because they've kind of moved away from that. But it was really a time of worship and teaching, and it was
Well, and
also
in
kind
like
of
the
a
early
fan.
2000s, it became NAC, right?
Yeah,
North American
yeah,
Convention of the Church of God or something like that.
yeah. And they kind of went from camp meeting to convention after that. And then, but it was also like a good family thing. Like, I mean, I would hear people who would go to like Anderson camp meeting where it's like, oh, it's our family go, or people would go to Whitehall out in Pennsylvania, and they had like their own little cabin that they would go. So it's like, oh, the family would stay together, they worship together. So it's kind of like one of those times which, I think after the 90s, it kind of started uh, dwindling down a lot. And but this article came out, and it's very interesting to just kind of see how important camp meeting is. So to kind of start off the conversation, like what are some of your experiences with going to camp meeting if you did go to camp meeting, Micah?
Sure, I went when I was I remember like going to Anderson camp meeting.
Hmm.
I remember some good memories, some bad memories, but like our family would like plan some of our summer vacations around Anderson camp meeting because that used to be like a Sunday to Sunday thing. So it'd be like a full week of church services and, like you said, different like workshops, and there was stuff for kids to go to. Well, the parents went to these, different things. And, uh, a lot of times it was on Anderson's campus. It was at Anderson University's campus. And that was back when they had Warner Auditorium, which, what year did that go down?
Oh, I don't remember.
Early 2000s?
Yeah, it must have been like mid 2000s because it was still up when I was at Anderson as a student. And then by the time I graduated, it was tore down due
Yeah.
to
So, like,
asbestos.
yeah, they had some really bad. I mean, it was a beautiful auditorium, but it just it wasn't worth saving, right? So
Yeah.
I remember like one of the bad memories I had was one year we went, we decided, hey, we're gonna like camp. We're gonna like legit pull up in a camper. We're gonna camp, and uh this is how we're gonna do camp meeting for the whole week. And I remember like the first night we had this pop-up camper, and for those who don't know what a pop-up camper is, it's basically just a trailer and it pops up and it's almost like a glorified tent with beds on each side, and there's not a whole lot of room. So I remember we get there, we get set up, and then there's like a tornado that goes rips through Anderson. And it was like the first night we were there. And it was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So anyway, that was one memory. In respect to like, you know, I went to several of the conventions at Anderson when it was still in Warner Auditorium as a kid. And then as a young adult, there was kind of a hiatus because we moved further away from Anderson. Um, and I grew up and was a teenager, had my own things going on, and didn't really attend it as much as I did when I was a kid. And then I believe that as a young adult, when I got into ministry myself and, you know, um, moved back to the area, you know, we used the word convention just a little bit ago, and it was they they kind of rebranded it and renamed it a convention. So like you have the North American Convention of the Church of God, or people called it NAC. And so like for a couple of years, it was like Anderson University was hosting it, but they were charging the Church of God to basically rent their facilities.
Hmm.
And it ended up being um, a sense, you know, I don't want to say a burden, but just like it was just like there was almost like this conflict of, between Anderson University and Church of God, even though Anderson University is a church grad school. And so, anyway, I went down to, I don't know, the 2 or 3 years that they had it at, on campus at Anderson. And, I think I think it was 2013, maybe 2012, 2013 was when they started moving it around the country. And so then they had it at Crossings Church in Oklahoma City, and then they hosted it there for a couple of years. And um, then they announced that they were going to do what you were talking about earlier with these regional conventions, which kind of I thought was actually a really good idea by Jim Lyon and his team. But like it gave folks a chance to go to like a mini version of what the bigger thing that we know NAC to be. Like,
Hmm.
and it was the same thing. You had services, speakers, workshops, all these things, worship, and it was, a 2 to 3 day thing, and they would have them spread throughout the country, and different churches would host them. So, like, we'd have them in the Pacific Northwest, we'd have them in California, we'd have them in the middle of the country, whether it was Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma
Hmm.
City, etc., Florida, New York City, Philadelphia, different places throughout the country to host these things, which again, I thought was a really good idea. And so they started doing those every other year where um on the off years they would do the bigger version of what these regional conventions would look like. I think they're still doing those, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they did regional stuff last year, and this year's like the one that they're going to be doing out in Colorado, the
Denver.
main national one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like, I, and then a couple of years ago, you and I, well, you didn't go, did you? It was in Florida, or did you?
No, I did
It
not go
was
to
in
Florida.
because we did a podcast on that. We were talking about how much it was going to cost and how
Yeah, we
expensive
did.
everything was.
I think you did the online one. We interviewed one of your buddies who actually went there.
Yeah.
But I didn't go.
And so I attended virtually, which was nice, which I think they still need to, you know, iron out some of those details.
Yeah.
However, um, kind of switching gears a little bit, what we know is the national convention, which is what I've just been talking about for the last couple of minutes. They also had district camp meetings, and like those were based on the state that you lived in. Some had districts, some didn't.
Hmm.
Um, I know in Ohio, for example, which is where I spent the majority of my life, um, off and on, we we had, in the Southwest Ohio, we had Lebanon camp meeting. And then in Southeast Ohio, we had Warsaw camp meeting. And then in Springfield, we had is it just called Springfield, I believe? Springfield camp meeting
Yeah.
outside of Columbus. And then in Northeast Ohio, we had Berlin Center. Um,
Hmm.
and so we had four different opportunities to go to four different camp meetings. And I think, Scott, you just mentioned it a little bit ago, but in Pennsylvania, Whitehall, I think it's called.
Yep.
That's one of the biggest camp meetings in the country and still is to
Hmm.
this day, at least according to my dad. I don't know. I've never been. Um,
Hmm.
but uh, I I've had the opportunity to lead worship for Lebanon's camp meeting. I have been able to go to Lebanon camp meeting for years and years and years, work the summer camps, go to the camp meetings, and it was. I think for a bit it got pretty stagnant. Like they had the same person doing worship every year. They had the same people doing the same special music every year, and then they
Hmm.
they would only have one speaker. Now, um, the idea of um, I lost my train of thought. The idea that this is what they're doing these days. They're trying to have like a different speaker each night, and they're trying to have like a more diverse grouping each year. And so, like this year, for example, at Camp Lebanon, they're having five different speakers, all from different churches in the Southwest Ohio district. So each night you're going to have a different speaker. And I think to pair that, they're going to have worship from each of those churches represented. So it's not the same worship team every night. So
Hmm.
like it's really cool because it's something completely different. Um, now I don't know what your experience has been with camp meetings, but like I've been able to go to Springfield, I've been able to go to Warsaw, I've been able to go to Berlin. I led worship years ago at there was a camp up in Minnesota, I believe it was Minnesota, but they
Hmm.
have the 6 or 7 states, North Central region of the
Yeah.
Church of God, which was like Wisconsin and Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa,
Iowa.
Nebraska, things like that. But I feel like I'm rambling at this point. So tell me about
Yeah.
your experience at camp meeting.
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I didn't really have much experience at camp meeting. Like maybe we went one day, and again, I was in Northeast Ohio, so it would have been Camp Berlin Center would be the camp meeting I would go to. But it just seemed like there wasn't a lot of push to have like any type of youth programming when I was there. Now, over times that has changed, and now they have like a thriving, great youth community out there at a Berlin Center and a Good Kids program. And I remember one time when I was still in a youth age that we had a puppet team and we had did a and our puppet ministry decided we were going to travel around and go do a show at all the different camp meetings because usually we're different weeks. They didn't tend to overlap with one another, probably because the state director probably wanted to oversee everything, so they did it that way. Um, but yeah, I got to kind of vaguely see all the camps then, and then it wasn't until I started doing the annual camp program at Marengo where we would go and we would be asked to um, kind of host youth camps during camp meeting. So we got the opportunity to go to Payne and Springfield and Warsaw and Berlin. We didn't go to Lebanon because they at that point they kind of already had their own kind of had a good thing going, so they didn't really need. And plus, at that point, Lebanon had their own camp and everything else, and they weren't sending kids to the state camp during that time. But they got to see more and more, and it's in some ways it's kind of nice because you do get to see a lot of other people worship with different people, but then you still kind of have the sense of this is almost kind of like a bubble in some ways, where it's like a week where you're kind of away from your normal hustle. You're connecting with other people within your denomination that's part of your region. You get to hang out with students, youth, and kids that are not just from your church, but from other churches in the region as well. And it becomes it's really good. Um, but um, other than that, there's also kind of this sense of, but there's almost like this sense of just like longing of being in a community. And I know a lot of times with camp meeting, a lot of younger generations are no longer being a part of it. But um, for the older people who this has been a big aspect of their life for so long, this became kind of a big part of it. And the other thing I would say too is I haven't been to a national camp meeting. Like I've never been to Anderson camp meeting. I did go to one of the regional conferences, and that was good because I got to go and see other pastors within who decided to come. I went to the one in DC, or technically Fairfax, Virginia. Um, it was nice. I got to see people from Virginia and other people from like West Virginia. So it was nice to have that camaraderie and it was a good time of worship. But there wasn't really a lot of like kind of that like how do I say it? Like kind of like that free time, like community building, friendship building with one another. It's like you're there, you're sitting in conferences, maybe you go to a breakout session, you have lunch, and then after that, it's like, okay, well, everything's over. I'm just going to go back to my hotel room and just kind of hang out, or maybe some people from the Virginia pastors may go and have lunch together. But it's not like you just kind of have that open time where you're just randomly colliding with people from like different states or different pastors and just kind of building those new friendships and those new relationships. I felt like that was an aspect that I kind of miss with that you get from camp meeting.
Yeah, I think, you know, long lost are the days that I think the term camp meeting and convention, obviously they're two different things. However, um, I've been to conferences that are not, you know, like we're talking about here, and people just go to the sessions and then they go back to their hotel and it's it, right? Like, or you go to grab dinner with your friends and it's it. It's very, cut and dry. And like there used to be a sense of camaraderie, like you were saying back in the day, of people just, spending time together and being in community. And it just doesn't feel like that's even a priority at this point.
Yeah. And so to kind of dive into this article, the author gives 5 reasons, and we're just going to kind of walk through just like the reasons. But the first reason they say is they provide an opportunity for true Sabbath growth. And the author writes just a section I thought was interesting. Um, he says, you rarely see a laptop, television, or gaming console. You often see porch swings, laughter, and lounging. Many who to attend, take the week of camp meeting as vacation from work. And when no one else is worrying about being productive or efficient, you won't feel the need to either. So there is just kind of this sense of during that week of camp meeting, especially if you're someone who um, is staying there, or even if you're someone who works regularly and then you go in the evenings, there is almost kind of like this element where you can kind of put your busyness on pause of life and just kind of be in the moment and to be present in Sabbath rest. So what do you think about that? That it provides an opportunity for true Sabbath rest. Camp meeting does.
I mean, if you're not involved in like being the speaker or in the worship, you know, team or volunteering on any level for the camp meeting itself, then yeah, sure, it's a time of rest and reflection, but it's also hard to, get away. And you know this as well as I do. Like, yes, we have downtime. Yes, we have off, time off, but like if people want to get a hold of us, they're going to get a hold of us. And
Yeah.
so it's, you know, I, I'm almost like a pastor's work is never done.
Mhm.
And, you may you may run into a situation that you weren't even expecting at a camp meeting, for example.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating too is, when you think about camps, especially as you start going from the 90s to the 2000s, like there'd be times where you would get out to some of these campgrounds were so rural that you couldn't even get an internet connection or a cell phone connection. So like literally you could be at home and have good Wi-Fi or landline or good signal on your cell phone, and you go to a camp meeting and it's like nothing. If you need to make a call, you have to go to a landline and call out. And even in that sense, it did kind of provide a sense of, okay, well, I can't do anything. Like I can't check my email. I No one can get a hold of me unless they call the camp meeting and someone comes find me. But that's it. Um, the second thing they say is they aid in the slow work of cultivating true community. Um, and they say today the average worker stays in their job less than 5 years. The average homeowner sells their home in less than 10 years. Sure, in 5 to 10 years, great relationships can be built, but like cast iron skillets, the best relationships are formed slowly over time. And he talks about how the camp meeting he goes to is going to mark his 26th summer being there. And through all the time, through births and kids growing up and even deaths, there is just this sense of this slow cultivating of a true community so that when you do get to a place where you are maybe you're struggling, you already have like a tribe of people who are there to pray with you, to comfort you, to encourage you, to lift you up. That has been developed at a camp meeting setting. What are your thoughts on that topic?
I mean, again, it really just depends on the situation, right? Like I think it's one thing if you go to like the same camp meeting every year and you know the people that are going to be there, you have lifelong companionship with some of these folks. Some of your congregants could go to this camp meeting. You advertise it in the church that you're pastoring. So you're going to see people that you know. Now, on the flip side of that, let's say that you, Scott, go to a camp meeting out in the middle of Oregon and you don't know anybody. That might be better for you because A, you're going to get that rest that you need. B, you're going to get to meet new people, and it's kind of force your hand a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I see your point, and I think even it's kind of like the idea of I think in the same way of kind of cultivating true community, just not necessarily longevity, but even the fact that, if it's a true camp meeting and you're out there and you're not engaging in, constantly engaging at like doing stuff on your phone and actually really engaging people being there present, like you'll be surprised just the type of new relationships you can build by talking to people where you feel like I don't have to be on my phone all the time, that I can actually talk to all these people and really build those relationships, and kind of build a bigger community, especially if I'm originally from Ohio, but I travel to go to camp meeting out in Oregon or California. Like that's I'm building up my kind of like my spiritual community in some ways because I'm connecting with people on a personal level. Uh, the third point that this author writes, it says that camp meetings, they are foundational, that helps with recalibration. Um, and they write the altar call, Sabbath time, and community that surrounds camp meeting provides just the kinds of opportunities through which one can easily explore the deep questions of life and experience the Holy Spirit move in a powerful way. They also come with the advantage that you can count on them every year. So, with that point, I feel like summer camps are kind of in that same boat because there have been many times where I have had people when we talk about, well, why do you like coming to summer camps? Why do you love summer camps? And they always say, well, it's a great way to kind of recharge my spiritual batteries. It's a way where I can kind of break away from the things at home or the things in life and really kind of get my priorities kind of like reorganized and focus on Jesus and kind of allow the Holy Spirit to transform me.
Yeah, I think it's as I kind of read that, it's like, I think of like all the times I got to go to church camp and, be a counselor, for example, and just the life-changing moments that happened to me and the students that I was counseling, or when I was leading worship, and the Holy Spirit would just, I will treasure those moments forever. And so, the idea that like um, we kind of take that for granted at times. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you know, need to be cognizant, I think it's the right word for it, that, cognitive of the fact that we are making a difference in those students' lives, and, God can work in them and through them and in and through us as staff and leaders of camps. And so um it's certainly interesting because, like, I like the word that they use in the article, recalibrate, because it's like you go in, you don't know what, I mean, how many camps did you work over the years, Scott? Like, you never knew what you were going to get going into the camp. And then by the end of the week, you're like, man, I've encountered some of the most life-changing stuff this week in a good way. Yes, it's been stressful. Yes, it's been hard. Yes, kids got hurt. Yes, kids wanted to go home. But at the same time, there is such a reward for pouring into those students and pouring into, um, oneself and being poured into at the same time, that I, it's almost like a shot of adrenaline. Like, you just can't beat it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, absolutely. The fourth list, and this one I don't understand their point, but I'll just read what they say. They say camp meetings serve as a reminder that we don't have to make faith up as we go. Um, which his explanation is kind of more of like, hey, like camp meetings have survived all this time when everything else is closed down at the turn of the 20th century. Camp meetings seem to still be going on strong. Um, but I really don't know what that has to do with how we don't make faith up as we go. I think a lot of times with camp meeting, I think sometimes it's always good to kind of get that sense of you're not alone with your own faith challenges. with your own struggles, with the questions that you have, because I think a lot of times, like when you think about churches in some ways, and I see again, I'll just use summer camp as an example, depending on the culture of your church, sometimes kids just felt like they didn't have the opportunity to really navigate questions they may have about God, maybe questions they have about faith, or maybe how to really find other resources to really help grow in their faith, because maybe their prayer life is get stagnant, or they just keep reading like these daily devotionals they get from their church for 50 cents, and it doesn't seem to really impact them in a way. And yet when you go to a summer camp, you have a variety of different people from different churches, from different cultures, from different regions, that can kind of bring almost like a breath of fresh air to how we how we live out our faith. But it's also kind of tied to the foundation of the scriptures. And I think sometimes with kids, when they would come to camp and they would have this complete transformation, I think a lot of it was the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives. But I also think a lot of it too was it was something that was still familiar for what they were being taught at their church, but it was new in a sense that they were able to understand it better. They were able to grasp it a little bit better, because they were in a setting where maybe they don't have, you know, that youth leader that's always grumpy all the time, that's sitting right next to them. Like they can actually feel like they could be free to kind of explore their faith and ask questions, not be told, well, this is the way it is, and you shouldn't ask questions about that. But yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for kind of how the author was going about the point of that camp meetings serve as a reminder that we don't make faith up as we go.
Yeah. I I'm with you. I don't really have a lot to say other than that doesn't make a lot of sense, grammatically
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah. And then
Written.
the last part, they say they formed Christians in a deep way. Um, and they talk a little bit about the idea of how camp meetings kind of disrupts, in some ways, our daily rhythms of our normal lives, and kind of helps us get into a pattern of daily rhythms as we adopt the practices of Jesus in our lives. And I would say I would say that would be true, because again, if you're going to camp meetings, like for example, regular typical week, you're probably going to church on Sunday. Maybe you might go to one weekly activity at church, and that's about it. At camp meeting, if you're not camping there, if you're just driving and commuting to go to camp meeting, you're going maybe once or twice, or maybe going every day. So you're basically having church at least up to 5 times, um, in a different location in a camp setting. And I think that in itself kind of breaks the mundane of our typical lives, because now it's not like I get home, I eat dinner, maybe I watch the news and maybe get agitated on what's happening in the world. You know, I'm I'm just rushing to take my kids to the next thing that they're involved in. And this way, it's more of like, okay, I'm now coming, bringing my family. We're eating. Maybe we'll eat out on the way down. We'll go to camp meeting. We'll have a time of worship. The kids have their time of like children's moments, or the youth have their youth moments. And it's that sense of feeling like that I am now connecting with God on a daily basis versus doing it on Sunday, because it's like the one time I can actually connect with God in my busy world.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways that's how, when I think about this, I feel like that's kind of how it forms Christians in a deep way, because we're kind of outside of our regularly scheduled programming of our lives.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, it really is. Like, I think some of those moments that I was referring to earlier with church camp, like with the students and stuff, it's because we're not in our normal routine. We're not in our normal space. Like we get out of the normal, um, I guess mundane. I don't know if that's the right
Hmm.
word for it, but like we we tend to be creatures of habit, and so um, I don't know. Like there's something magical about getting away and being in a different location, and things tend to happen. Um, and eyes tend to be opened, I guess. It's certainly interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for those of us who are listening to the show right now, like, what is your experience with camp meeting? Like, I mean, this author listed 5 ways on why camp meetings important. We want to hear why you think camp meetings important. Important. I can't even say that word. Important. Um, we would love to hear why you think it's important. We would love to hear your experiences, and we like to share them on our podcast. So again, if you're listening to this podcast, feel free to comment either on your YouTube page, or if you're wherever you're listening to it, comment on there, or you can email us at the Scott Stedman thescottstedmanpodcast.com. You can just go there, click on email us, and we'll read your emails on air. But friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And if you are in a tradition that does have a camp meeting and you've never gone, or you go sporadically, maybe this summer think about maybe giving it a try. Try going at least if you go once a week, try going twice a week this year, and just see how it transforms your life. All right. Thank you so much for listening. God bless. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.